My hope for you is that you find a life of little p purpose. I hope for you that leads you to communities like I found at store Liberty's Antiques. And those communities help you become a better person, and you help them become better people. And it creates a legacy like did. So I'm going to start today by telling a story, and this is the story of a man who changed the world with baseball cards. So when I was a little kid, there was an antique store right by my middle school. I literally passed it almost every school day. And the guy who owned it, his name was, he was a local guy, a baseball player. He was a really good high school athlete, but messed up his knee. Didn't end up getting any college scholarships, decided not to go to college, and instead took over his father's antique shop. He was handy, right? He could redo furniture. He loved doing it. So he could go and take over his dad's antique shop, and he had the requisite skills, and it would make him some money, and he would be great. One day, someone walked in and brought an armoire to sell to him. He knew immediately that he could sand it, restain it, flip it, and sell it at a good price, so he took it. And a few days later, he was in his workshop, and he was cleaning it up, getting ready to sand, and he opened the bottom drawer, and he found a stack of baseball cards. Now, he loved baseball, right? He was a high school athlete. This was really something important to him, but he knew nothing about baseball cards, and honestly, he didn't even really care about them. So he went and he called the guy, and he said, "Hey, I found these baseball cards. You want them back before I flip this armoire?" And the guy said, "Don't worry about it. I don't want them. Keep them." Didn't even think about it. He just kind of took it, put it on his front desk, didn't pay attention. A few more days later, a woman came in with her snarky high schooler. And the high schooler was looking distracted and bored as his mom was looking at the furniture. And he walks up to the desk and sees all the baseball cards. And the high schooler looks at and said, looked through the cards. He said, "How much for the stack of cards?" Had no idea. He didn't know what they were worth, but to him it was extra anyway. So he's like, "How about $10? And the kid was like, "Fine," pulls out his wallet, gives him $10. And then as snarky teenagers do, he flipped through the stack, took 3 cards, put them out on the table and said, "These 3 cards on their own are worth $50. Something happened in that moment. And it wasn't anger. No, it wasn't anger. Maybe it was his memory of holding his dad's hand while sitting in the bleachers at Cubs Stadium. Maybe it was the joy of hitting a home run during high school. I'm not sure what it was, but he was enthralled. And all of a sudden, he knew that he had wanted to have something to do with this. He didn't know why. He just knew that this spoke to him. So he hired this snarky teenager, his name was Ryan, right there, and said, "You're going to work for me, and you're going to teach me about baseball cards. And we're going to sell them here at Liberty's Antiques, along with armoires and desks and all the other antiques that I sell." And something fabulous happened. He started to learn about the baseball card market, bought and sold them, and he actually started making more money than he was on the antiques. But this is where I come in, because I was an 11-year-old. I had no friends. I had a learning disability, so I was behind in school. I had no community, but I loved baseball cards. And when I discovered Liberty's Antiques, it changed my life. I went there. I met other kids like me, nerds, geeks, people who didn't have friends, people who didn't have a community. And he was like our mentor. Like when you had a bad day, you'd go there, he'd give you a free pack of cards, you'd open it up, you'd eat the horrible gum that came in it. And that changed my life. Now you might be wondering why I'm standing up here talking about today, why I'm even thinking about him. Well, it all started when I wrote my book, Taking Stock, a hospice doctor's advice on financial independence, building wealth, and living a regret-free life. I went to market this book, and I would come to places like this, CampFI, and I would talk to it, and I put a whole talk together about this book. And really the talk was about 3 premises. The first premise was we have to find our sense of purpose, identity, and connections first before we look at our finances. And as a hospice doctor, it was easy for me to talk about purpose because I was sitting with people when they were on their deathbeds and they were telling me about their regrets. And having that lens of knowing they were going to die released them of all the fear about talking about what was really important to them. And so when I thought about all these young people that I was dealing with in the personal finance world, I wanted them to have that same clarity. I wanted them to do the life review that we did with hospice patients. I wanted them to ask themselves, if I found out I was going to die tomorrow, what would I regret never having the energy, courage, or time to do? And when you can answer that question, it becomes the anchor, the beginning of understanding your purpose. So that was purpose. But then I wanted to talk about identity. And my favorite thing to do with that was to ask myself the question or say the statement, I am, and then answer it. But not just answer it once, but do it over and over again. Because the first time you do this, you're going to say, I am, and you're going to put your profession there. I am a doctor, right? And then you go deeper and you talk about your family, and eventually you get to the core of who you are. For me, that's I am a writer, I'm a creator, I'm a podcaster. So that was purpose, that was identity. And the last little piece, connections, was because when we actually delve into our purpose and identity, the connections naturally flow. And so I found that being a doctor had no sense of purpose for me, so I never wanted to hang out or be part of doctor groups or societies. I didn't want to go to the doctor's lounge. But when I discovered writing and podcasting, I'd go to personal finance conferences like this one, and I'd immediately meet people and feel connected to them. So the first premise was purpose, identity, connections before your finances. The second premise is once you have an idea of purpose, identity, connections, you can then build a financial framework around it. If any of you have read my book or kind of know me or heard me talk, I talk a lot about the parable of three brothers. The parable of three brothers, it's just simple. It's some of the pathways we can take to financial independence. One pathway is front-loading the sacrifice. That's like traditional FIRE. Work really hard. Maybe you don't like your job. Get to a net worth, quit, and then live out the purpose you want to live. That's front-loading. That's path one. Path two, side hustles, passive income. Maybe within a short period of time, you can build up side hustles and passive income and things like real estate and pay yourself every month from those and free yourself so that you can start doing a little more purpose now. Or maybe the last path, the third of the paths, was the passion play. Maybe you can just do something for a living you love and it can pay your monthly bills. So 3 paths to financial independence. The second premise and the last premise was that no matter what your sense of purpose and identity and connections are, no matter how successful you are in your financial path, you still have to ask one basic question. Do I spend today or do I save for tomorrow? If you've read Die with Zero, right? This whole idea I should spend right away and live for today. But it's a little more complex than that, right? Because we don't know when we're going to die. So the third premise is instead we should ask ourselves another question. What are we most afraid of? Are we afraid of this idea that we're going to die early and wealthy and never use our wealth to enjoy ourselves? Or are we afraid that we're going to live long, run out of money, and then not have enough? And if you can answer that question, you can start looking at the continuum between YOLO, you only live once, and deferred gratification, and figure out how it feels good to spend today. So that was it. 3 premises for my book. I came to places like this, CampFI, and I got a response that I never, ever expected. After hearing this, a small part of the population would come up to me and they'd be angry. They'd be fuming and sweating. And they would say, how dare you tell me that I need to find my purpose? I've been looking for my purpose forever and I'm not finding it and it's making me anxious and I don't think there is a purpose. Why are you pushing me to do this? And so I looked it up. And indeed, there's studies that show that 91% of people have purpose anxiety. Anxiety surrounding the fact that they think purpose is important, but they have no idea how to find it. But then I started looking further and also found that having a sense of purpose in life is associated with longevity, health, and happiness. So how does this make sense? It's a paradox. How can purpose be the most important thing to being healthy and happy and yet cause people so much anxiety? The answer, I believe, is that we look at purpose completely wrong. That purpose is not one entity, but at least two, and that there's a good type of purpose, the type of purpose that helps us live longer and be happier, and that there's a bad type of purpose that gives us a huge amount of anxiety. I call them big P purpose and little p purpose. So big P purpose is the bad form of purpose. And why is it bad? It focuses on goals. Sounds kind of crazy, right? Goals are good. Actually, I think goals are kind of bad. And here's why. First and foremost, you can fail at goals. And in fact, when you're talking about big P purpose, big audacious ideas, most people are going to fail. You are not going to probably make it to $1 billion. You may not cure cancer. And if you were someone like, he wasn't going to go back at the age of 30 with a bad knee and become a Major League Baseball player. If that had been what he really wanted and thought was his purpose, he was going to fail and it was going to make him anxious. So big P purpose is bad because of goals. Now, I think purpose should be goal agnostic, not goal phobic. I think it's fine to have goals with your sense of purpose, but your sense of happiness and connectedness can't be reliant on reaching that goal. So why is big P purpose bad? It's goal-oriented. It's also failable, right? Why should we put all of our sense of purpose and happiness on something that we can fail, and the bigger we shoot for, the more likely we fail? It's out of our control, right? Didn't have the right genetics to be a Major League Baseball player. He was too old. He could never get those years back. It is what it is. He couldn't change it. And so when you focus on big P purpose, what you're really talking about is scarcity. Only a certain number of people can be in the major leagues. Only a certain number of people can be president. The rest won't make it. So what should we do instead? I think we should focus on something called little p purpose. So little p purpose is not about goals at all. It's about process. It's about doing things that you enjoy doing them because you like doing them, and not what comes from them afterwards. Why is this better? Well, first, it's abundant, right? There is no shortage of things you can do that you enjoy, and it doesn't matter how many other people have little p purpose, you can still have yours, and it doesn't take away from anyone else. It's not fallible. Little p purpose is all about showing up and trying to do the thing. That's it. As long as you show up, you're there. And it's completely controllable. You get to decide what purpose is to you, and you get to decide how you show up. So the difference between big P purpose and little p purpose, and why I think little p purpose is more important, why I think big P purpose has to do with anxiety and fear, and why little p purpose has to do with all those benefits. But that still doesn't answer the question. That still doesn't help the fact that this lady came to me after I talked to CampFI and was so pissed off because she didn't know how to find her purpose, whether I called it little p purpose or big P purpose. So there are a few things. One is you don't find purpose, you create it. But it is true that we have to find concepts, ideas, or things that we like to anchor our sense of purpose around, right? Found that he had a connection to baseball, but then he hired Ryan and built purpose around that. He built it. He created it. He didn't find it, but he had to find the anchor. So people ask me all the time, well, how do you find what's purposeful to you? And I think there are a few basic steps. Right? There are a few easy ways to do this. Some will work for some people, some will work for others. So the first thing you can do is what I talked about when I was talking about my book, Taking Stock, is you can do a life review. You can look them up on Google and I'll tell you exactly what questions to ask yourself, etc. But the idea again goes back to if you found out that you were going to die tomorrow, what would you regret that you had never had the energy, courage, or time to do when you start answering questions like that? Those are anchors to building a sense of purpose. So that's one way. But there's some other ways too. Like think about it. Maybe many of you have jobs and maybe you don't love your job. But have you ever thought about what you could love about your job or what piece of your job you love even though you hate the rest of it? I mean, it certainly happened to me. I was a doctor and I was burning out. And yet I knew I knew that I loved doing the small part of my job at the time, which was hospice work. So hospice was an anchor for me, and I would do it even if I wasn't being paid for it. So by looking at the current job you have, even a job you don't like, you might be able to find an anchor there. Another key way to start looking for anchors is to think about your childhood. Have you ever watched a young child play? They know exactly what they want. They know exactly what excites them. And when they find something that excites them, they keep talking and talking and talking about it and won't stop. Why is that? Well, often it's because society hasn't yet told them they couldn't do that thing. Because they aren't busy thinking about how they're going to make a living and how valuable they'll be and how they'll look on Instagram. They don't care. They just know what they like. Most of us lose those passions of childhood, not because we're any less passionate about it, but because we walked away. Because it wasn't what adults do. Think about it. If you are 3 or 4 years old and you go to your mom and dad and say, hey, I want to build a pool in the backyard, they will take you in the backyard and play with you and you'll giggle the day away having fun. If you do the same thing when you're 12, they'll tell you all the reasons you can't do it. They'll tell you, you got to get permits, and what about liability, and I don't even know if the soil is right for doing that kind of thing, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What are some other ways? I love this idea that we have whisperings of purpose in our lives and we often ignore them. When was the last time you got an idea late at night or even it woke you up and you were so excited you couldn't fall back asleep? What happens? We sleep horribly that night. We wake up the next day, we go to work, we get exhausted, and somewhere in that day, we let it go. We convince ourselves that it was a crazy thought and we move on. And we never think about that thing ever again. Other ways. Ask friends and family. Have you ever asked your friends and family, when do they see you most lit up? When are you most authentically yourself? If you have no idea, maybe someone in your life does. Now, that doesn't mean you should do everything they tell you to do, because your friends sometimes have their own issues with you and what they think you should do or shouldn't do. So if they tell you to do something that feels bad, you probably shouldn't do it. But sometimes those people who love you can see you most clearly. And last but not least, my favorite, if everything else fails, use the spaghetti method, right? You take a bunch of spaghetti, throw it against the wall and see what sticks. That means saying yes to just about everything and everyone. It means sticking yourself into things that scare you and being uncomfortable and finding out if any of them feel good. It's simple. Little p purpose is there in your lives. Most likely, my bet is that somewhere deep down inside, you already know what it is. You're just too afraid to address it and have the courage to pursue it. But these are the things that maybe could really make your life wonderful. So I could hear the question that none of you are asking me. The problem with little p purpose is, what about impact? What about legacy? So this is kind of the kicker of the story. He died 30 years ago. He got testicular cancer. Passed away. Just like that. Out of nowhere. Yet I am still here talking about to a bunch of strangers today. And I'm not the only one. There were 10 or 15 of us. We didn't have confidence. We didn't have friends, but we certainly built it. We developed direction. And we went out in the world and we became doctors and accountants and lawyers. And we had our own children. And we took them to the store and bought them packs of baseball cards. Like a ripple in the ocean, what started with is still happening today. And you know what? You know who I don't talk about, who didn't affect my life at all, who had no impact on me? Mickey Mantle. I used to collect Mickey Mantle baseball cards. He was a predominant player in Major League Baseball, changed the sport, and yet Mickey Mantle has done nothing for me. The legacy he created has not touched me at all, but it has. And so you might be arguing, well, maybe Mickey Mantle didn't touch you, but he touched countless others. But then I'd also tell you how many people developed a sense of big P purpose around being Mickey Mantle. For every million people who did, one succeeded, and 999,999 failed and probably have purpose anxiety today. So in conclusion, my hope for you is that you find a life of little p purpose. I hope for you that leads you to communities like I found at store Liberty's Antiques. And those communities help you become a better person, and you help them become better people, and it creates a legacy like did. And I hope you live a life like and not Mickey. There is a postscript to this. To this day, died of a testicular cancer, and we have no idea why he got it. No risk factors. It was just bad luck. Mickey Mantle, after years of abusing alcohol, got cirrhosis and died of liver cancer. A few weeks before he died, the press asked him a question. They said, "What do you want to tell your millions of followers?" And he said, "Don't be like me." Thank you.